Si quieres tener lo que pocos tienen, tienes que hacer lo que pocos harían.
La vida es 10% lo que te pasa y 90% de cómo te lo tomas.
Sexualidad se une con espiritualidad y vamos a tener esta sexualidad sagrada.
Que el corazón tiene esa capacidad de intuición y de saber las cosas inclusive antes de que sucedan, inclusive antes que el cerebro.
Queremos que digas ajá y que nos caiga el 20. Así que platicamos con visionarios, artistas, científicos, doctores, chamanes y toda clase de disruptores,
porque creemos que tan solo con hacer preguntas,
pero sobre todo al escuchar,
podemos cambiar la forma de percibir el mundo,
ser más empáticos, abiertos
y humanos.
Ajá, es un espacio en el que sacamos del closet temas de los que poco se habla,
los cuestionamos y tratamos de entender la vida. Yo soy Paulina Feltrín.
Y yo Valeria Benavides.
Y esto es
Ajá. Hola, bienvenidos a un episodio más de Ajá. El día de hoy estamos muy contentas porque vamos a hablar de un tema que nos apasiona, que son las frecuencias electromagnéticas, el wifi y todo lo que nos está radiando y que lo vemos súper normal, pero no lo es tanto. Y la verdad es que es un tema que vamos a platicar con el autor de este libro, Radiation Nation. Él es deBaun. Él es un experto en el tema, trabajó durante muchos años en las telecomunicaciones, estuvo en SAIC, en Telcordia, AT&T y en Bell Labs. Luego fundó, junto con su hijo, la compañía que se llama Defender Shield, que es una compañía que tiene la confianza a nivel mundial para tratar de educar y proteger sobre frecuencias electromagnéticas. Esto es todo lo que nos está radiando y bueno, su libro que les decía que se llama Radiation Nation, habla sobre cómo nos está fallando la tecnología, nos están radiando y no lo sabemos. Así que es un tema de salud importante a tratar y estamos hoy con Daniel. Esta es la versión en inglés, la versión original para quien nos quiera escuchar. Y bueno, le damos la bienvenida a Daniel. Daniel, good morning.
Good morning, Paulina. How are you today?
Happy to talk about this. Happy to have you on the show.
Well, I'm excited to talk about this this kind of problem in our environment or issues in our environment. And let's get started and chat about wherever you'd like to go. I'm excited about being here for your listening audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel. And we would like to start knowing a little bit more about you, about your history, about your work that you have been doing. And can you tell us briefly what's your work experience and why you started to look at this topic?
No problem at all. I was in the telecommunications industry for 30 some odd years. And my role in the telecommunications was developing standards and then testing technologies to meet those standards. So I had a lot of background in the science and the engineering of the very technology we're going to talk about today. In fact, in my laboratories, I looked at electromagnetic radiation and how it influenced other electronic devices. Ironically, I never worried about electromagnetic radiation influencing a human. Till about 10, 11 years ago or so, I had my sons visiting. They're adult men, and they had their laptops on their lap. And my wife, who's not an engineer, says, that can't be good for you. That radio frequency signal coming off the laptop, the emissions from the processing of that computers, that can't be good for the body and particularly for your sperm. I want grandchildren. Stop using it for so long. And I said to my wife, no, the power levels are so low. There's no way you can expect that they would influence the sperm from the electronics. But, you know, it was funny. I thought about it a tiny bit, and I never really did do much investigation into the research side of this. So I decided, let me take a look. Let me see if there's any evidence that what she's saying may be true. And this was a concerned mother, not an engineer. And so I began looking into it, and I was actually shocked that we actually knew a lot 10, 15 years ago about the impact of electromagnetic radiation, RF signals around us. And at that time, there was several studies that identified a Wi-Fi signal off a laptop computer after 3 to 4 hours immobilized this male sperm by 25%. And I said, whoa, I really did not realize that. And I had been in this industry for many, many, many years. And so I began looking at it a bit, and I began realizing that I don't think the telecommunications industry realizes that the science has been identifying some issues related to emissions, and nobody knew about it. So what I did was I built for my sons a shield that protected them when the laptop was in their lap. And so they used it, and then their friends wanted it, and the neighbors wanted it. And all of a sudden I began developing products for an industry that didn't really exist much at that point. And it was all about defending yourself from the kinds of modern devices we have around us every day that's only been in our environment for the last 10 years or so, very close to our bodies. That's how I actually got started. That's what prompted me to write the book with my son. That's what prompted me to develop products in Defender Shield. It was all about no one really knew. People really should know so they can make decisions about what they want to do in their lives. And that's how I got started.
It's impressive because we are having all these problems about fertility.
Yes.
And now you're telling us that their sperms are immobilized like 25%.
25%.
In your life.
And Paulina, what was also true was there was a study in Italy at that time that took a very large population of women, and they evaluated the impact to the womb of a woman 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And what they found was 2% of all of the women that used this created tumors, not cancerous primarily, but some of it was cancerous. And so even then we knew from some studies, it's both male and female that are being impacted. Yeah. And so, that's what's the facts.
I remember when I was little and cell phones starting to be popular, there was this, at the time, myth, I would say, about brain cancer when you were using your cell phone. And then suddenly all that information disappeared and the cell phone became very, very common. And by reading your book, you mentioned something very interesting, that it says that cell phone industries, or mobile in general, wireless, is becoming the new cigarettes. Because at the time, the tobacco industry knew the damage of smoking, but there was so much money behind it that they didn't want to expose it. So can you tell us, what is EMF, these electromagnetic fields? What are they, and why are they damaging to our body like the tobacco or any other toxin?
Okay, so cell phones have been around for 30 years. And when you used it, you had no one to call because no one could afford a cell phone at that time. And so we very rarely used them because we didn't really have anybody to talk to. Fast forward to today, your 6-year-old child calls your grandmother and stays on the phone for hours at a time. So all of a sudden, it's coming into our environment and it's permeating our environment like never before. Like the cigarette smoking, I smoked cigarettes 45 years ago, or farther out, but beyond that even. And I was smoking when I was 12 years old because the advertisement said I'd be a big man and I would be very successful when I smoked. At that time, research knew there was a direct correlation to smoking a cigarette and cancer. And as you were pointing out, No one knew. It took all these years for us to find out finally that there was a direct correlation. And by the way, the reason that happened was because the tobacco industry lost in court. They literally were brought to court and ultimately they lost in court. So if you look at the parallels with EMF, electromagnetic radiation, the identical parallels. Research really, there are thousands and thousands of research studies that show direct correlation to impacts to the body, the human body, and yet the average person doesn't know. And so that's the problem, and it's paralleled other kinds of situations, and it takes years to emerge. And now we're at the point where, we're starting to learn enough to got to be aware of what your environment is and think about what you want to do in it and how you want to protect your family and your own body.
And we have been talking a little bit about cell phones, and the relation with tobacco, but of course, I think radiation is everywhere with every device. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about where are these frequencies? Where is this radiation coming from on a regular basis in our lives?
Yes. So, you had a portable radio years and years ago, and you listened to music on your AM portable radio. You listen to FM on your portable radio. Those are radio frequency signals. That's RF. It's electromagnetic radiation. That stuff's been around for a long time. And so we still have the radio AM, FM still in the environment. But what's now happened is we have Wi-Fi's in our environment. We have Bluetooth technology in our environment. We have cell phones in our environment. All of a sudden, we have so many more sources of emissions that didn't exist when we had our AM portable radio in our hands. And it's all very close to us. A radio frequency signal coming out of a cell phone is about, let's talk about a Wi-Fi. A Wi-Fi signal is 2.4 gigahertz. 2.4 gigahertz. It's just a number, 2.4. A microwave oven is 2.3 gigahertz. So when you have a cell phone to your head, there's a signal that is a microwave signal, an RF signal, that is one and the same. The power level is much less from the cell phone than a microwave, but yet it's still a thermal transmitting signal. And in the microwave, when you put a piece of meat inside the oven, the water heats up between the cells, oscillates the cells, and voila, you have cooked meat. Well, guess what? That's what's happening when you have a cell phone, but the power levels are much less. But believe it or not, standards allow that signal of an adult male to heat up by 2 degrees where the cell phone is. And let's talk about that a little bit. When you have a laptop, a cell phone, you have a Bluetooth signal, a Wi-Fi signal, and a Bluetooth signal. You have actually 3 separate signals from that one device. Your laptop, your iPad, all of these are sources of RF, mostly Wi-Fi, but it can be Bluetooth and cell connections. So you have all of these sources of devices within your own room, and it can be several dozen because kids have devices they're working on. You have all these devices turned on for all the connections that each device can do. So that is what is actually becoming the issue. It's that we have all these microwave signals at low level, more and more in our environment. And that's what's creating some of the conditions that you find with electromagnetic exposure. You may have neurological problems, physiological problems. Your ears may ring, your headache. You may have a headache. You may feel dizzy, foggy thinking, lack of concentration, sleepless nights. And you may contribute all that to events during the day. But it's a fact that every one of those conditions have direct correlation, scientific evidence pointing to that direct correlation.
I like to think about it as water and ice, or like a bee. If you have the stitch of one bee, probably it's just going to hurt and nothing major is going to happen. But if you are stitched by 1,000 bees constantly, then it becomes a problem. And I like to think also, as I said, as ice, right? When you look at the glacier, normally water would do nothing to the rock. But when you have the constant friction of water, you can break a mountain. So I think it's what's happening to us. And I would like us to go deep into that, because it's not just having your cell phone. Just by this conversation, I think I've been radiated by my wireless lamp, by the router, by the laptop. I have two cell phones. I have an iPad, and they're very close to my body. So is that the problem? The problem is the constant use and the number of devices that are radiated, because you're talking about a micro frequency. So how can it affect our bodies?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Paulina. It is the fact that we have multiple sources in our environment, and it's constant. It's not going away. Like when I talked about my first cell phone 30 years ago, I had no one to call, and I was never really using it. And it wasn't really that close to me because it was a big brick that was next to me that had the transmitters on it. And I very rarely used it. And when I didn't, I had it far away from me. That was 1B, as you pointed out. Well, today you have 1,000 bees in your room, 1,000 bees transmitting. And it's that accumulation that they call it the ambient. The ambient in the room is just increasing with a toxin. You think of an RF signal as a toxin. It's an external influence to the body, like a chemical is, like any other environmental thing we're exposed to. Our body reacts to it.
So it's kind of the extremes that we have to look at, no? Because we cannot just throw away everything. We cannot be part of this technology. We cannot be separated from the communication today, no? And even less now that we are starting to be more at home and that we have been working for 1 year from home and studying, and everybody's together and we're all connected. So how should we protect ourselves or lessen the risk of mixing toxins, but also radiation, but also what we eat? Because I know it's a combination of things what makes us sick, but we never look at this. And it should be quite simple to just eliminate the extreme exposure somehow.
Right.
So can you share with us some tips for doing that and for better understanding how to lessen this exposure, at least at home?
So that is absolutely a wonderful point. The reality of it is, if you're aware of your environment, you can really take a lot of action to minimize the potential dangers to the body by taking simple actions, right? Like a cell phone. We talked about a Bluetooth, a Wi-Fi, and a cellular connection. Do you use all three of them? I don't. I use just my cellular connection. And so the very first thing you to think about is, if you're not using them, turn them off. If you can, turn them off permanently. And when you need it, turn it on. At night, for example, with a router, have a device which turns it off, your router off. And so it's not populating your living environment at night, which is a very important point you want to make sure you do. But that's true for all of these technologies. You simply can turn it off when not using it, or distance when you're close to these devices. And let's think of it this way: when you have a cell phone to your head, that's the most potentially dangerous to your body. If you take it 1 or 2 feet away 80% of that danger is gone. By 4 foot away, a little over a meter, it becomes 98% safe. So simply by putting it distanced away from your body, you actually reduce the potential exposures. And so those are very simple things you can do. Turn stuff off. If you're using stuff, use it. But when you're not, move it away if you can. And of course, the other thing is when you're using a device very close to your body, the time duration. If you're using a cell phone for a couple of minutes a day, there's nothing to worry about at all. But if you're using it for hours at a time, you're a heavy user of cell phones. After 10 years of heavy use, you are 3 times more likely to get a frontal lobe cancer. So it's really the usage exposures play at a very important point. So reducing exposures simply by keeping time durations of exposures lower actually improves the probability of you being healthy. Very simple stuff.
Very simple, and it's all about being conscious. Sometimes we are not conscious about anything.
You have to simply be aware. Be aware of your surroundings. Look.
And let's be different, because everybody is on their cell phone. Everybody's following technology. Everybody feels cool because now we have the ability to open our doors with our cell phone. Yeah. The air conditioning turns on before I arrive home. And we don't realize we are building an iceberg.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And here's another analogy. If you and I went out and went to a bar and we each had a bottle of whiskey, a tequila, we each had a bottle of tequila. You had yours, I had mine. And you decide to drink the whole bottle really fast. What happens to you? You fall down and you don't wake up for a couple of hours. If I take my tequila and take a shot of tequila every so often, by the end of the night, I will fall down right next to you. It just took me longer to get there than you. So your exposure was the same as mine, but it was over time and exposure levels that I was at. But ultimately, it ended up being the same thing to both of our bodies. Our bodies couldn't handle all the alcohol. And so you really want to make sure that you try to keep that exposure as low as possible. And you own it. You own your environment, and you can turn stuff on and off, and you control that environment. You're the architect of your own destiny in this case.
Wow. Now, can we're talking about risks for our health. We know that autoimmune diseases, tinnitus, cancer, fertility, all these are impacted by radiation.
Yes.
And you mentioned before that all these devices and those frequencies are tested on adults. But I can imagine not adults are the same. I'm very small. I'm not a tall woman. And I cannot imagine what can it do to kids, to babies.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point, Paulina. The standards in the US, which is pretty much adopted across North America, is that they took and modeled a military group of the average 6-foot male. And they said, let's see how much the signal can penetrate in the head and how much it can heat up. Well, it turns out the standard allows the signal of a cell phone to go 1 to 2 inches into that head of that average 6-foot male. And it allows it to heat up by 2 degrees. And so if you think about it a little bit, and to your point, that represents about 3% of the population, right? There's women, there's children, teenagers. There's so many variations in the usage of cell phones by so many different physical characteristics. A 6-year-old child has a very thin shielding. The signal goes not just 1 to 2 inches through the head, it goes completely through the head. And if it's a woman, a small woman, or a larger child, it goes halfway through their head. So the standards were created for a 6-foot male, and it represented 3% of the population. How about everyone else that's using it? So that is the problem, particularly for children. As we mentioned, I haven't had a cell phone in my life, my whole life, but your children do. They're being exposed to these signals at a very, very early age, and there's deep penetration because of the very soft tissue of a child is not a full adult, but small. They're very fundamentally different biologically, and that biological difference is very significant in how the body responds. And how does the body respond? We were talking a little bit about what is the body physically doing, and why is there a link to potential problems? It's pretty simple. If you were in the woods and there was a bear and started running after you, you would have to decide, are you going to fight or are you going to run? It's a natural evolutionary response of the human body. And believe it or not, that's what our cells do. When it's exposed to a toxin, the fumes from a welder, the body responds to that in either, am I going to fight it or am I going to run? So there's a physical reaction, an evolutionary response that the body has to these kinds of exposures. And that's what's suppressing your immune. When you have a cell phone, it's literally your body's immune is being suppressed by these signals, making you more susceptible. But it's because it's in what they call CDR, cell danger response. And the cell danger response, there are many cascading problems related to those kinds of things because the body's in that state. It's not just the free radicals and antioxidants that are misplaced. It's the fact that there are certain things that the body can't do. As an example, when you have a cell phone next to your bedroom night table, the signals from a cell phone actually engage the pineal gland and goes through the eye, believe it or not. And so you may have a problem with your sleeping pattern as a result of that, because that transmission is so close to you. If you were to use a tablet at night before you go to bed and you're looking at this screen, something we haven't talked about is in the electromagnetic space, visible light is electromagnetic radiation. It's just visible. And so when you have a tablet at night that's generating high LED signals and it's being recepted by the eye, the blue component of that signal actually starts screwing around with your sleeping pattern. It tells your body that it's still light out. And so the pineal gland, which is in the back of the eye, actually is the little switch that turns on and off. It will stay off because it still thinks it's light. When it goes on, that's when the melatonin starts being created. So you're literally disrupting body functions, not just impeding cells. They're literally body functions that are being impacted and modified as a result of these exposures.
Yes, I recall we had a very interesting talk about the impact of those kinds of habits in our sleep, and in our quality sleep, and of course, in the way we rest during night.
Yeah.
Which is really impacting because we have so many habits of being connected until we really can't anymore, at night, and we're just falling asleep, but we do not rest, and we do not get all the benefit of a fully and complete sleep, which is very important in our body, no?
Absolutely. You're talking about the circadian rhythm of the body. When you're awake, the body does stuff. And when you go to sleep, your body does stuff. It repairs at night, and it's active during the day, and it's operating. So your mitochondrial repair occurs at night. And when you're not fully sleeping the way it should be, you're disrupting the repair of the mitochondrial. Those are the little engines that gets the body going. So when you wake up, you can go to the next day. So all of a sudden, you start getting into a cycle of less repair than you want and more and less resilient in the environment you live. It's a vicious cycle that occurs simply because of disrupted circadian rhythm, as you're pointing out.
Yeah, and one question regarding radiation, because we are understanding that we are all exposed. We're understanding that we should be treating differently our babies, our small or children, and not only looking at the information and investigation because it's based only in adults. So we should be more conscious about it. But
yes.
Something that I would love to know is there a difference on the way people react or how we respond to EMF? Are some more sensitive to it? Do some are, as we also are comparing it to what we eat or how we sleep? Are we all impacted by the same way or not?
No, we're not impacted the same way. There are definitely, for many, many reasons, different responses by the body. And the food you eat, the health of your body, all of these influence, the health of your immune from the gut is important, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that, but all of these influence how the body reacts. Now, given I said that, 20% of us are electric hypersensitive. That is, when you go into a room, you may get a headache or you may feel a little tired. There are certain symptoms that occur, and they're in a direct response to electromagnetic radiation exposures, typically radio frequency stuff. And so that 20% is of the entire population. Of that, 80% are women, and nobody knows. Is it hormones? Is it brain structure? No one's really been able to explain, but so many times, you as a woman, you go to the doctor and say, I have this headache every time I get in front of my computer. And the doctor says, take 2 aspirin. Well, it's not the aspirin that's going to fix the problem. Removing the computer is going to fix the problem because you are electric hypersensitive to those signals. And some people, it can get pretty severe. I work with a clinic, one clinic out in the West Coast of the US, and they actually had a person come in to the clinic on a wheelchair, and they were exposed for years to very, very high intensity electromagnetic radiation. And it became so debilitating that he could barely walk. And so most are not extreme in that way at all, but you're in that spectrum somewhere, and it can be pretty severe. Yeah. And by the way, that's growing. And I keep on asking the question, why women? And I still can't get an answer. Science does not know.
I like to talk about prevention because in this show, that's where we like to tell people what to do to prevent. And talking about this, I can imagine there is also a very high impact on our nervous system because it's the one that it's the electricity of our body.
Right.
And there's someone very close to my family that was detected with Alzheimer's disease. And they then realized that they're living very close to an antenna. So they are being radiated even more. So when we're thinking about, probably I started using a cell phone on a daily basis when I was like 20. So it's going to be like 50 years of my life that I'm constantly in use.
Right.
So is there any data that it is related to Alzheimer's disease or memory loss or brain fog, all these things, or even mental health that is a big issue at the moment?
Absolutely a fact. If you're exposed, heavily exposed as a young person, by the time you're 75, you're 2 times more likely to have Alzheimer's, twice as likely to have Alzheimer's. And it's because of the inflammation that occurs at early exposure dates. It just accumulates in time. And there are many studies that show that direct link for occupational exposures, residential exposures, or for people who simply use cell phones and stuff. We know for sure that there's direct links to, here's an example. If you have, you're in the first trimester of your pregnancy. If you have a heavy exposure, you are 3 times more likely to have a miscarriage than the average woman in the first trimester. When you talk about ADHD or autism, that's been linked in studies in vitro. It started in the womb. In other words, if you had your cell phone in the back pocket and you just conceived and you had a full term, there is evidence that shows that linkage can influence the growth of that child from that point on. It's really interesting that the average person doesn't know that, but in fact, it's true. Now, the low probabilities, it's not like 50% of the women who have a cell phone in their pocket is going to have a child that has autism or any other serious problems. But it's not zero. And so, as you know, precautionary action is something we control. And if you don't have to put it in your back pocket, don't put it in your back pocket. Prevent that potentially from happening by simply not putting it in your back pocket.
For a start, no? and shutting up everything. It should be very simple.
Yeah, it's like women put their cell phone in their bra. What are they, nuts? It's like, it's legitimately true that there's direct correlations that show that created breast cancers, and they could have avoided it if they put it in their pocketbook. So it's like simple things you can do to avoid the potential downside of modern technology. And you can still use it, but you're more cautious about how you actually use it.
Yeah. And talking about modern technology, something that has been very noisy now and that everybody's talking about, and that we don't really know what it means, at least me, no?
Right.
But can you tell us a little bit more about 5G?
Yes.
And what is this going to be in terms of radiation? In Mexico, we are not there yet. I know in the US, you're all fully 5G now. But what is the impact of this new frequency or this radiation or this technology, and how should we protect ourselves from more and more exposure now being everything 5G?
Wonderful question. So 5G by definition is 5th generation. That means there's been several before that, up to 4G. And so if you think about it, 5G, the standard, which is worldwide, is a standard which basically uses the same frequencies, similar frequencies that are currently used in 4G and previous. So in other words, we already know the impact of those kinds of signals because we've done a lot of study work that's given us insight into how it may affect our gut, how it may affect the blood-brain barrier of the head. We know a lot about those kinds of things because it's been around. So the controversy about 5G, if there's any, is that it's different and we should be concerned. Well, it turns out a lot of what we know is being used in the 5G. The big controversy is about the other stuff, the higher stuff. With 5G, the signal, let me explain a little bit first. When you have a one wave go by over 1 second. That's called a hertz. I think I may have mentioned a cell phone is roughly 1 gigahertz. 1 gigahertz is 1 billion cycles in 1 second. That's how many cycles is in 1 second that's passing by. When you talk about this other 5G stuff that's coming out, you're talking about stuff at the 20 to 300 gigahertz. That's 20 billion cycles in 1 second to 300 billion cycles in 1 second. So that second half of 5G is so much faster than we've ever seen in our environment before. And that's where the concern is, because we know nothing about it. In science and research, there have been no study work. We do know that that there can be, and we haven't talked about this much, but when you're exposed to an RF, the gut itself propagates, some of the bacteria and virus propagate more than others. It likes the RF. Well, it turns out at 20 gigahertz, that's the same thing that happens here. The body likes that rate, and it propagates the microbiome to maybe disrupt that biome. In the case of up to 4G, we already know that we have imbalance in the biome as a result of it, and we see particularly unique bacterium growing more so than you'd want, and in some cases pretty dangerously. So we already know that. Now we know that this new 5G 20 gigahertz space, we see similar kind of reaction. We also know that at about 90 gigahertz, if I shot a signal to you, and what would happen to your body? What we know for sure is that you have helical coil sweat glands. And when you have that signal come towards your body, that acts like a little antenna. And so your body reacts by heating up. And in war, believe it or not, this is what they use, 90 gigahertz signals with the enemy to disperse the enemy. And so we know at certain frequencies, the body reacts and in some cases, not so good. But the reality of it is there's no study work at all. And that's really the biggest concern that the scientific community has is, what does it really mean? The only thing we can do is speculate and say it's probably similar to up to 4G. And as you increase the rates, it may continue having similar kinds of impacts, maybe even more. And so that's why there's the big concern. And so what can you do about it? Most of the stuff that's in the US that they're talking about is in the lower bands. So you don't have to worry about it no more than you do 4G. So don't panic about it. There's not really anything that's going to be of concern more so than what you currently are exposed to. If you have a house and they put a tower right in front of the house, and they have several of those towers right in front of your house, those are referred to as small cell sites. Those are the ones transmitting the 20 to 300 gigahertz, the nanometer signals you may have heard of them about. And so those are more dangerous and they're more focused. And in those cases, if you can avoid it, don't use the services of that cell site. In other words, if there's cable TV that's going wireless in your area, they may want to do this with the cable, eliminate the cable and use this wireless connection. Well, don't do it. Just don't accept the service, and you will not have those kinds of signals coming into your home. So avoid it when you can, but if you can't avoid it, move your bedrooms to the back of the house because we don't know much about it at the front of the house.
Daniel, you talk about how we need to shield ourselves,
yes.
And I'm thinking about how, as humans, we always look to progress. We always want better. So we are very happy to have this download, upload connection. We can see our Netflix faster, and we can connect anywhere. And we are not being conscious about that it is radiating us more than ever before, just because we are taking a little bit less to download our next episode. So when it comes to shielding, which I think is very important, and besides trying to go to the woods or be at the ocean, an open space, and we can connect with the earth and a little bit of grounding that I assume it helps. What is it that we can do? Because you own this company that is called Defender Shield. What is it that we can do easily at home? And what are the appliances that are available in the market if we want to take it a step further?
Perlita, when we started, I was talking about how I got started, right? And I said to myself, we're not victims. We're using this technology, and there are ways of protecting our body. And that started me on the path of providing shielding that works. And you can have simple shielding between you, the device, and your body. And I created shielding for my sons, which ultimately ended up being a company that provides shielding products. The whole goal of the products was to minimize exposures. I'm never going to eliminate them. You're going to have it in your environment, but you can reduce it. And if it's really close to your body, you can reduce it by eliminating the signal directly towards your body. And so there are devices out there that provide shielding products that some work, some don't. Be careful. Make sure you find providers who have independent study that shows your product works. There are devices there. I'm on this conference with you, and I'm using earbuds that I created. It turns out that the wires actually emit signals when it goes to your head. And if you are electric hypersensitive, that could bother you. And so what I did was I simply converted the signal to an acoustical signal. So no electricity comes to the ear. And I avoid the exposure to the very soft tissue of the body. You remember that. It's the soft tissue that's most exposed. It's the frontal lobe. It's the breast. It's the heart. It's the groin area. Those are the most susceptible. And your finger, you won't die of cancer from electromagnetic radiation on your finger. It's too dense. The tissue is too dense, but it's the very soft tissue that's more exposed that you want to be worried about. But because of that, I created the shielding products for my sons, and it's evolved. Interestingly enough, as it's evolved with 5G, we were talking about that second half, which is really where the danger lies, because we simply don't know anything about it. Well, I've actually developed over the last few years shielding materials that shield that signal. And so as you choose to embrace the technologies around us, you may be able to find ways of ensuring your health by finding products that can shield those kinds of signals. And we have what we refer to as Ultra Armor. And it took me literally 2 years to develop it because I knew this was coming, and I wanted to provide ways of people to make choices and protect themselves if they wanted to.
Great to know that we have this kind of products for protecting ourselves, for increasing the extension of being without exposure to these emissions. And we're almost finishing today, Daniel.
I think before we finish, Val, maybe you can give us, Daniel, 5 simple steps that someone who is listening to us can tell us what to do, No, Val, maybe we know that we need to turn off our cell phone at night, turn off the wire, the wireless.
Right. So I've said this before, you're the architect of your own destiny. You control a lot of things in your environment. And here are the kinds of things I recommend. In your bedroom, you want to eliminate all sources because of the interference with the circadian rhythm. So you do not want your phones next on the nightstands. You don't want electric clocks a foot away from your head when you're sleeping.
The smart TV.
Yeah, you want all this stuff off. You don't want any current flow, and you don't want little lights on or any of those kinds of things.
I have a question then. Is it off, or it needs to be disconnected directly from the wall?
If it's off, that's okay. You do not have to disconnect it.
Okay.
It's when there's current flowing in the walls that's the problem. So when you have it plugged in, there's a tiny bit, but so minuscule, I wouldn't worry about it. But you want to make sure that you clean that environment. And oftentimes you'll find you sleep better because you've eliminated the simple devices. And the router, I was mentioning the router. If you have a router, I've actually talked with people who have a router in the bedroom. Get it out of there. That's crazy. You have a transmitted signal and you're all night. So it's a sanctuary you want to clean up. The second thing I would recommend is if you don't need it on, turn it off. So go to all your devices. Your laptop computer may have a Wi-Fi and a Bluetooth. I don't recommend either one of them. I recommend a wired Ethernet connection to the laptop. But if you have to have the Wi-Fi on, that's your choice. But you certainly don't need the Bluetooth on. So reduce the number of bees in the room. Simply methodically go around your house, reduce those bees in the room. Be especially sensitive to kids. It is very important to manage their environment more than yours. And so what you really want to try to do is be very diligent, particularly in the bedrooms of the children and the surrounding rooms of the children, that there are no real Wi-Fi sources or any other phone. They don't have their phone underneath their pillow. You want to make sure that those devices are far away. Time, distance, and shielding are your friends. That's sort of a general message. Time, distance, and shielding. And you'll be able to live with modern day technologies and be pretty safe while using it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Easy things to do. It's just a matter of changing habits, really.
Yeah, that's all it is.
As everything that has to do with lifestyle changes.
Yep. Simple lifestyle.
So now that we're almost finishing, we always like to ask our guests that we can close, if you can share with us any aha moment that has been important in this process of what you have been doing in the past, which is taking care of your family, but also about society and about consciousness around the world, which is great. And we're very thankful for that as well.
I have a slightly different aha moment that I'd like to share.
Good.
It's what do you need to be concerned about in your life? It turns out that on your deathbed, you're not going to be worried about the podcast you produced, the book you wrote, the job you did. You'll not remember any of those things. What you will remember is very simple: the friends and family around you. So don't take them for granted, because those are probably the most important parts of your life.
Very true.
Very powerful.
Very true. Yes.
Now that we're talking about cell phones, everybody spends more time looking at their cell phones, even when they're at the dinner table. So thank you for a great reminder that personal connection is what matters. And thank you for your time, Daniel. If someone wants to follow you, if someone wants to read your book, how can they find you?
Okay. At defendershield.com, you'll find a learning section, and we talk about all these subjects in our learning section. We link all the studies and research that we know about, so you can sort of understand and educate yourself about the subject. We also sell Radiation Nation, the book my son and I wrote. So if you, that's it. And if you'd like to learn more, Paulina, I wrote that book for mothers. We honestly did. It's a complicated subject, but the mothers of the world need to know that this is the book they should read to understand their environment. And so the book's fairly easy flowing, and it gives you the facts, not the fiction of the subject matter. And if you like products or technology that we offer, defendershield.com is where to get it, or Amazon. We sell at Amazon US.
Thank you for your time. It's been an eye-opener, and we thank you for that. A todos los que nos están escuchando, muchísimas gracias por haber compartido este episodio. Sin duda, uno de los que se deben de compartir, de los que debes pasar a amigos, a familiares. Si hay alguien de tus amigas que está en un tema de fertilidad o alguien que acaba de tener un bebé, muy en especial, compártelo con ellos. Y nos vemos el próximo martes. ¿Dónde nos pueden seguir, Val?
Nos pueden seguir en nuestras redes. Estamos en @aja.mx, en Instagram y en Facebook.
Así es, nos esperamos la próxima semana. No dejen de compartirlo, no dejen de dejarnos un comentario y nos vemos el martes. Yo soy Paulina Feltrín.
Y yo, Valeria Benavides.
Y esto es Ajá.